Section 1. The Ghost of Room 3327, Unmasking the Beautiful Stranger. All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to a very special, incredibly spine-chilling explainer. Today, we're unraveling the absolute most infamous ghost story in California history. And honestly, we're going to completely tear apart a legend that has been actively deceiving people for well over 130 years.
So, I want you to picture this. Imagine yourself stepping into the historic, heavy wood-paneled halls of the Hotel del Coronado, late at night. The ocean waves are just relentlessly crashing outside, the wind is howling against those old Victorian windows, and you find yourself standing all alone right in front of a heavy, dark wooden door. Room 3327. Formerly known as Room 302, this space is basically the epicenter of the hotel's dark, suffocating energy. Would you dare to spend the night in there? I mean, for over a century, thrill seekers and ghost hunters have paid premium rates literally just for the chance to experience what lurks beyond that door. But here's the thing. Many of the people who confidently check in, they end up grabbing their bags and fleeing in the dead of night, utterly terrified by things they simply can't explain to the front desk. And listen, this isn't just local folklore. This isn't some campfire tale meant to sell tickets to tourists. The terror inside this specific room is palpable. It's actually scientifically documented, and it is absolutely bone-chilling to anyone who actually crosses that threshold.
The sheer volume of unexplained phenomena in Room 3327 is staggering. We are definitely not just relying on old wives' tales here. Back in 1992, the hotel actually contracted Christopher Chacon, a highly respected parapsychologist, to conduct a rigorous, strictly scientific investigation. They didn't just walk around with flashlights. They set up a full mobile lab right there on the property and logged over 10,000 hours of continuous environmental scanning. 10,000 hours! They meticulously measured electromagnetic fields, severe temperature fluctuations, you name it. And the results? Truly terrifying. They documented massive pieces of heavy furniture shifting completely on their own inside empty rooms. They recorded these sudden, extreme cold spots that totally defied the room's ambient temperature and the coastal weather outside. We're talking heavy, disembodied footsteps pacing the floorboards right beside the beds and hushed, agonizing whispers echoing from empty corners. Televisions and lights would just operate completely on their own, somehow bypassing the hotel's electrical grid entirely. But by far, the most terrifying thing, numerous independent witnesses, people who literally had no idea about the hotel's history, reported seeing full-body apparitions of a young woman. She's always dressed in dark, heavy Victorian clothing, just wandering the darkened halls and those freezing beach steps. The sheer volume of aggressive, scientifically unexplainable events is enough to make the biggest skeptic look over their shoulder.
So, to really understand why this room is so heavily haunted, we have to rewind. We're going back to Thanksgiving week, 1892. On November 24th, this young, strikingly beautiful but deeply despondent woman arrives completely alone at the glamorous newly opened resort. She walks up to the front desk, grabs a pen, and signs the register under the name Lottie A. Bernard from Detroit. Now, oddly enough, for a wealthy traveler of that era, she carries almost no luggage, just a small, simple valise. Over the next couple of days, her physical condition and mental state just rapidly deteriorate. By November 26th, she is complaining of severe, agonizing illness, specifically neuralgia and debilitating stomach pains, and she actually goes and buys quinine pills from the hotel pharmacy to try and cope with the pain. But on November 28th, her behavior takes a much darker turn. She travels off the island, heads to a busy gun shop in downtown San Diego, and deliberately purchases a heavy .44 caliber American Bulldog revolver. And then, the very next morning, November 29th, right after a violent, lashing coastal storm, her lifeless body is discovered by an electrician. She's lying on the exterior stone steps leading down to the freezing ocean, dead from a devastating gunshot wound to her right temple.
During her tragic 5-day stay, this beautiful stranger was seen just wandering the sprawling hotel like a lost, restless soul. Staff members consistently noted her melancholic demeanor, the sheer sorrow in her eyes. She confided in the hotel's chief clerk that she was desperately waiting for a male companion, maybe a brother who was a doctor or a wealthy gentleman friend, but he simply never arrived. Imagine the crushing dread of that, being completely alone, violently ill, and abandoned in a sprawling luxury resort. In a lot of ways, she was a ghost long before she ever died. At one point, she was actually heard murmuring this heartbreaking, devastating phrase. Just listen to the despair in these words. "Oh, no one comes for me anymore." It's just drenched in absolute sorrow. She was trapped in this gilded cage, right? Watching all these affluent vacationers celebrate the warm Thanksgiving holiday with their families, while she waited in the shadows for a savior who had coldly left her to face her terrifying fate completely alone.
Now, the authorities handled this grim discovery with astonishing, almost suspicious speed. Within a mere 24 hours of her body being found on those steps, the local coroner, W.A. Sloan, and Dr. B.F. Mertzman held a rushed inquest and delivered their finalized verdict. They confidently declared it a suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The narrative they spun to the public was incredibly convenient and perfectly tidy. They said, look, here's a severely depressed woman suffering from an excruciatingly painful and incurable illness like stomach cancer. She's driven to the absolute brink of despair by her abandonment, wanders out into a raging storm, and takes her own life. Case closed, wrapped up with a neat little bow. They aggressively pointed to her isolation, her depressed demeanor, and that rusted .44 caliber revolver found mere inches from her hand. It was framed as an open and shut case, or, well, so the official history books and hotel brochures have been telling us for over 130 years.
But here is where we literally gut this legend. Was it actually a suicide, or was it a cold, calculated stage murder? As we aggressively dig into the dusty archives, that neat and tidy official story starts to crumble like wet sand. When you evaluate the physical evidence through the unforgiving lens of modern true crime analysis, the glaring inconsistencies are massive, and honestly, they're terrifying. The extraordinarily rapid closure of the case by the Coronado Police Department reeks of a deliberate, desperate cover-up. Think about it. They needed to protect the pristine, high society reputation of this million-dollar luxury resort. A scandalous, bloody murder of a beautiful woman on their property would have been an absolute PR nightmare in 1892. So they seemingly just swept all the bizarre, non-fitting details straight under the rug. Well, let's rip that rug right open, because the cold, hard physical evidence left at the scene tells a much more sinister story.
Okay, let's break down the forensics, because this is where things get wild. First up, the weapon. The gun found resting in the sand at the scene was a massive .44 caliber American Bulldog. However, the bullet that remained lodged deeply inside her skull, because there was shockingly no exit wound, was estimated by the medical examiner to be a much smaller .38 or .40 caliber projectile. Now I want you to think about that. How on earth do you supposedly shoot yourself with a .44 caliber hand cannon, but have a .38 caliber bullet trapped inside your head? It is a glaring, physically impossible mismatch that just screams of a staged crime scene. Furthermore, that .44 caliber gun was found completely rusted. Yes, there was a heavy storm that night, but rust takes significant time to form on that kind of metal. It heavily suggests the gun might have been placed there hours or even days after the fact by someone else. And, perhaps the most terrifyingly damning detail of all, the autopsy noted absolutely zero powder burns on the victim's skin or her dark clothing. A point-blank self-inflicted gunshot wound to the temple with a dirty black powder revolver from the Victorian era would have undeniably left massive, horrific stippling and black powder burns all over her face. Yet, her skin was completely clean. Was she actually shot from a distance by an unknown assailant in the dark who then carefully planted a rusted, entirely different revolver next to our hand?
Despite these massive, gaping forensic black holes, the local police were under immense, suffocating pressure from the hotel's wealthy investors to close the case now. So, who was this beautiful stranger? Well, within days, authorities confidently slapped a convenient name on the nameless corpse: Kate Morgan. They proudly announced to the press that she was a 24-year-old runaway wife from a rural town in Iowa, desperately fleeing a scoundrel, gambler husband named Tom Morgan. How did they supposedly figure this out so quickly? They relied entirely on a few vague telegrams and an abandoned trunk left sitting at a cheap boarding house in Los Angeles by a lowly domestic worker. The police eagerly, almost aggressively connected these fragile dots. They claimed Kate had stolen away to the Coronado, realized her husband wasn't coming to save her, and killed herself in a fit of despair on those dark steps. And the newspapers? They absolutely ate it up. And just like that, the tragic legend of Kate Morgan, the suicidal, heartbroken ghost of the Hotel del Coronado, was born.
But let's look at the cold, hard facts and put these two women side by side. On the left, we have Kate Morgan, the universally accepted identity. She was a humble domestic worker, a poorly paid maid from rural Iowa who specifically suffered from rheumatism. She had left her cheap, meager belongings in an unlocked trunk in Los Angeles. Now look at the beautiful stranger on the right, the actual victim, found dead in the storm. She complained to doctors not of rheumatism, but of severe neuralgia. When they searched her body, she had a Canadian penny in her pocket and distinct, verifiable ties to wealthy circles in Detroit. Most tellingly of all Witnesses specifically noted she traveled with expensive, high-end trunks featuring incredibly fancy French locks. A rural, impoverished maid from Iowa wouldn't likely possess foreign Canadian currency, nor would she ever have access to luxury, high-end luggage equipped with complex French locking mechanisms. I mean, the vast difference in social class, the entirely different physical ailments, the unaligned geographical ties. Absolutely none of it matches up.
And if you aren't completely convinced yet, let's look at this absolutely impossible timeline. This is the nail in the coffin. This is where the Kate Morgan theory completely and utterly shatters into a million pieces. Concrete historical records confirm that Kate Morgan worked her scheduled shift as a domestic servant in Los Angeles on Wednesday, November 23rd. But our beautiful stranger, registered as Lottie, walked in and checked into the Hotel del Coronado on November 24th. And here is the kicker. Multiple, highly credible witnesses, including a U.S. consular officer named Joseph Jones, who actually signed the hotel register right after her, spotted Lottie on a train arriving all the way from Denver, Colorado on November 24th. It is physically and logically impossible for Kate Morgan to have worked a grueling shift in Los Angeles on the 23rd, somehow teleported across the country to Denver, and then ridden a long train back down to San Diego on the 24th. The timeline proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the maid Kate Morgan and the wealthy, beautiful stranger are two entirely different people.
Which brings us to a truly spine-tingling, horrific revelation. For well over a century, the dark spirit lurking inside room 3327 has been famously agitated, aggressive, and deeply restless. In 2007, paranormal researchers, including a medium named Bonnie Vent, conducted a focused session to communicate directly with the terrifying entity haunting the hotel's halls. And the message they received through the ether was shocking, incredibly specific, and just heartbreaking. Listen closely to this chilling claim from the other side. My name is Lottie Bernard, not Kate Morgan. I am waiting for my true story to be told. The spirit explicitly, angrily rejected the name Kate Morgan. Now, the hotel clerk back in 1892 had accidentally misspelled her spoken name on the guest register as Bernard, but modern historical researchers diving deep into actual Detroit census records found a Lottie Barnard, spelled B-A-R-N-A-R-D, who fits the beautiful stranger's profile absolutely perfectly. The spirit isn't just haunting the room out of sadness. She is actively, furiously protesting a century-old lie.
So the crucial point to take away from this dark investigation is that the most famous, terrifying ghost in California history has been called by the completely wrong name for 130 years. Let's unmask the undeniable truth here. Kate Morgan likely died in some undocumented, tragic accident somewhere else entirely, maybe struck by a heavy carriage in Los Angeles, as some modern researchers now strongly theorize. Her identity was then mistakenly stolen by history just to tie up a messy loose end in San Diego. On the other hand, we have the wealthy Lottie Barnard, the true, terrified victim left bleeding on the freezing beach steps. Her real story, her high society connections, and the very real, terrifying possibility that she was brutally murdered by a hired assassin and the entire bloody scene staged, all of it was completely swept under the rug by a luxury hotel and a corrupt police force desperate to avoid a financial scandal. The real beautiful stranger was violently silenced in life and completely erased in death.
Which leaves us staring into the dark with this final, chilling question. Is the restless, aggressive spirit of room 3327 lashing out simply because history remembered her by the wrong name? Put yourself in her shoes for a second. Imagine the sheer, suffocating horror of being trapped in the exact place of your terrifying, violent death for over a century. Thousands of strangers sleep in your room. Tour guides confidently tell your story. Millions of people know your face, but they all call you by the name of a complete stranger. They call you a pathetic, suicidal runaway, when you were likely the terrified victim of a calculated, cold-blooded murder. Wouldn't you throw heavy objects across the room? Wouldn't you scream in agony from the dark shadows? The ghost of the Hotel del Coronado isn't just a spooky campfire tale to tell in the dark. It is the agonizing, century-long cry of a murdered woman fiercely demanding her true identity back. Next time you're alone in an old hotel and you hear a heavy floorboard creak right outside your door, ask yourself, whose story is really being told? I strongly encourage you to dive into the dusty archives yourself, because the terrifying mystery of Lottie Barnard is far from over. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and stay curious.